Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amidabutsu, Namo Amidabutsu, Namo Amidabutsu, Namon Daps, Namon Daps, Namon Daps. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you are all doing well, and thank you for joining me online today for some online learning as it pertains to our Dharma, our weekly Dharma message here at the Arizona Buddhist Temple. So, I'm a teacher, as many of you guys are well aware, and I appreciate your taking the time to come online and watch these messages because, as a teacher, I can tell you that the online schooling experience that we went through the last couple of years was very challenging. I would go so far as to say that online schooling, from the opinion of parents and students, has roughly the approval rating of like wet socks, which is to say like not very good at all. The kids, of course, had a really hard time with online learning. It's really difficult to check on students consistently in that process. And a lot of the content that we were learning at the time was just like flying over their head. Whatever was projected on the screen, they were reading it, but I don't think that they were actually like understanding it or like interpreting it very well. And plus, they didn't have a chance to be social and those sorts of things. They didn't have a chance to really like to participate in any of the material with their friends, and I think that really hurt them. Except for the introverted kids, they did great. They actually really seemed to enjoy their year off. But I remember kicking the whole thing off with kind of optimism. I remember I read an article about online learning, and I read that the best way to approach online learning was like traditional education, because when you're doing Zoom, you can still make kids talk and have conversations. They can still read. And so they said, well, maybe you should treat this like the Socratic method. And so I said, okay, we'll try that. And I figure I design everything around the Socratic method, give them interesting things to read, and then they have them come together and discuss it. And it didn't go very well, like at all. Like I had a lot of really awkward, long, just sort of like blank screens with people standing around saying absolutely nothing. So eventually I tried to shift my approach again. I started creating like these really high quality videos to try to keep them like engaged. And I started creating all these games which allowed them to record their own videos and things like that. They were doing podcasts, they were doing a bunch of interactive stuff, and that also went really badly. Eventually, I just like the types of stuff that they were turning in was just very poor, and they were not more engaged than they were with the Socratic stuff or the traditional stuff. It's been about a year since that all transpired, right? And in the time that's passed since the online learning stuff has taken place, I've gotten a chance to kind of talk to some of the kids about like what made them not like it, right? What was so difficult about it? I mean, we know it's difficult, but what was it? A lot of them agreed that the issue wasn't that they weren't trying, because again, I have like kind of advanced kids, they work really hard. And it wasn't that the content itself was too difficult, but what they said was that whenever the materials presented through Zoom or just through like online forums and that kind of stuff, they said it was like just not as engaging when presented that way, and that they felt kind of detached and removed from school. Like it was almost like they weren't in school at all. And it was as if that they were sort of just passively absorbing information without actually putting any mental fortitude behind it. And even if something was like funny or interesting, it was like they would just move on to the next thing right away, and then it would be like in one ear and out the other, which, I can sympathize with that. They could like memorize the details of stories they read or recite something that came out of it, but they really like couldn't connect it to anything that was going on in their real lives, even if it was like designed to be about what was going on in their real lives. And one kid put it really well for me. He said that like every class online didn't matter the teacher, didn't matter the content. It always felt really distant, is what he said. Like he's like you're watching it, but maybe you're not participating. And that's what I kind of took to home, right? It was distant. I mean, it is distance learning, but you get the idea. It's cognitively distant. This was obviously a while ago, and we're back in regular classes now, which I'm grateful for because it's good to be around like regular students again, right? However, I have to admit, when I was talking to all these kids about this and just sort of like getting straw polls on how it went, I definitely connected with the idea that it was very much like, as they said, it was distant. Um, And I think this applies to me personally, obviously as a teacher, but also as a student. And when I mean a student, I mean like a student of Jodo Shinshu, a practicer of Jodo Shinshu. So I'll give you an example. On my nightstand right now are three books that I've been working on. One of them is Ironweed, another one is Infinite Jest, and the third one is a history of Renyo Shonin. And of these three, it is the history of Renyo Shonin that has been sitting there the longest. And that is really something considering how long Infinite Jest is. And it's not that I don't enjoy reading about Jodo Shinshu or anything like that. I try to read as much as I can. But it's more that I find lately that as I read the words of the text of it, as I move through its chapters and sort of think about it, I find that like what I'm doing is just reading the information, right? Right? I'm reading the actual words of the teachings of the Buddha. But as I do so, it's harder to connect them sometimes. It's harder to truly understand them and grasp them sometimes than it would be under a normal setting. It isn't that the words have changed, and I myself have not changed as far as I can tell too much. But it's more that as time stretches on, and I've been kind of disconnected from the temple itself, and the people of the temple, the sangha, and the teachers, right? Sensei Van, Sensei Lin, plus all my teachers over at the JCC Center, all the people that you normally work with. The ideas themselves, as my own students kind of said to me, right? They become kind of distant sometimes. I mean, you can read about compassion. You can read about benevolence. You can read about interconnectedness all day long, right? There are beautiful authors out there with beautiful words. But reading about them sometimes doesn't feel like it is a proper substitute for living it and actively participating in it, with like other people or having someone to trust and guide you through it. You can literally memorize the exact words of the masters, and have them in front of you and take them in day by day. Spend your days trying to interpret them. But if you're kind of like disconnected from the people themselves and the understanding of everything, and more than that, from the community that allows you to practice those teachings, again, they kind of feel like words, when in reality, they are these truths that you live your life by. So all of this kind of resembles to me the thinking that goes into something that all the different Buddhist sects discuss, and that's of course this idea of the age of Mapa, right? The last Dharma age. Sensei Lin talks about Mapa quite a bit. It's essentially this era, the last of three eras, where you have the teachings themselves written. Like people can actually access the information and read about the teachings. But there is not the actual practice as you normally have it anymore. A lot of the practices don't exist, or they're hard to come by or hard to learn exactly. And also, perhaps most importantly, there are no more living, breathing, enlightened beings that are walking around in our daily lives to teach us about Buddhism. And in this sense, it's kind of regarded as the last Dharma age, the end of the Dharma age, right? It's like the end of it, right? There's no one to teach it. There are words we can read, but actually doing anything about it, practicing it feels somewhat foreign. And I think we can kind of sympathize with this, right? Because this resembles, to me and to my students, what it was like to learn through distance learning, right? To learn about something complicated, whether it was the meaning of Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, or reading Fahrenheit 451 or Lord of the Flies or something like that, but to learn about it through just the words and the screens themselves, to look at a tiny window and words on a page and to understand all the deep, complex meanings that go into those stories. We have the words in front of us, right? But we're removed, we're distant, we're not connected to it. The teachings of the Buddha, divorced from our community and our lives themselves, if we're not practicing them, sometimes it feels like words. And that, of course, is it's missing a big point of it, a big part of what it is to practice Jodo Shinshu. The age of Mappo has been going on for many, 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 many years here, right? Ages and ages and ages. And we can kind of think of the works as Shinron and Honen as a response to this idea of the last Dharma age. And the story of Shinron kind of explains this, right? Shinron himself realized that he couldn't become an enlightened being by himself, and he needed to find another way. You know the story, right? It goes that when Shinron went to Mount Hiei as a child, he was regarded as the best candidate to become enlightened. They looked at this kid and they thought, like, he has all the tools, he is the perfect person. If anybody here is going to become an enlightened being, it would be Shinron, this young man, because no one else is pulling it off these days, right? And so Shinron entered in this temple with very high expectations. He practiced daily, he meditated, he was very austere in his practice, right? He was the best of the best. And in spite of all that, all the teachers around him, all of the guidance, all the texts that he had, he failed. He was unable to become an enlightened being. He felt that his mind was too distracted, too defiled, right? He was so angry about this that he left the mountain, right? I mean, it might have turned out differently if there were beings to actually help him out Mount Hiei, but he decided that he could not do it this way. And if this was failure, of course, this was the failure that drove him to find a new teacher, right? He sought out help, and of course, he eventually meets Honen Shonin, which that's the inspiration that he takes to eventually develop the entire practice of Jodo Shinshu, that which we're talking about today, and that's, of course, what we practice today. As I said, had there been a living, walking, breathing Buddha around to teach Shinron at Mount Hiei, perhaps he would have taken that more direct path. But because there wasn't, and because he felt that there was no way for him to understand the teachings as they were being taught to him that way, he had to look for other ways to understand the teachings of the Buddha. He found Honen, but in addition to that, he also recognized that there was another way for him to practice, right? And that was learning to trust the Buddha himself. Shinron recognized in this dark, dark period of his life that it was the primal vow itself that ensured birth in the Pure Land, and of course allowed for all individuals to eventually become enlightened beings like the Buddha, one with the Buddha. And of course that there is no compassion, that the compassion of the Buddha, there's no place that it cannot reach. And so this too, I think, is where we can kind of think about where we are, both with distance Dharma messages and online learning, and also in the age of Mapa, right? It's tough because it feels like temple's been closed for a long time, and it does feel like we're disconnected sometimes, right? And I hope that soon we will be able to practice together again and rejoin our community, our Sangha, the traditional way, the way that it was historically intended, the way that we have been doing for generations now. But I do look at Shinron's story, right? And the moments that Shinron describes when he talks about these sorts of things. And, he did face something similar to what we are experiencing right now. And when he faced this struggle to comprehend and understand and apply these teachings in a way that would allow him to reach the next level, he sought out other ways to express them and practice it. And this is, of course, up to the individual to do, right? Whether it's the way that you read novels on your nightstand, or the way that you reach out to people on your own, or the way that you cultivate your own practices. There's all these different ways that people are doing right now, incredible different things. And the perhaps most important thing to remember, though, is however you try to practice it, as Shinron realized, the key thing is that the Buddha's grasp and reach are itself limitless as light itself. And it's important to remember that no matter where your mind is at, and no matter what age you exist in, teachers are not, the Buddha is still there, with arms compassionately outstretched, trying to reach us. It was true for Shinron back in the day, and of course, as he has taught us, it remains very pertinent to us right now. Please take solace in knowing that when we say the Buddha's name, just as Shinron did in the darkest hours of time, darkest hours of understanding, we can recognize that in spite of all we experience, all these challenges that arise, the Buddha is still there for us, with us. The Buddha has our back. Thank you for joining me. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namam Daps. Namam Daps. Namam Daps.